Our next set of words starts off with the word travesty. A lot of you may know one meaning of this word. It sort of means grotesque or absurd. Actually, technically it means to imitate something grotesque or absurd or really silly. In the original sense, it was a literary device which satirized serious works. Shakespeare used it, so it has a little bit broader meaning than a lot of you think it does. It comes from the French word travesti, which was in disguise, so you can see where the word imitation is fairly appropriate. The correct pairing up, obviously, would be the very bottom one, a grossly inferior imitation, travesty. Our second word is abort. Most of you have heard that word. It means to fail, to cease, to stop at an early stage. For example, you might say the rocket launch was aborted, and you can use the word almost in any way where you want to stop something. It's one of these words that start with ab. Again, we've talked about that prefix, very common prefix. Usually means away from, and the root was oridi, which is Latin, meant to rise, to start, to begin. Of course, you see the word or in words such as origin, so that makes sense in that particular case. Thus, if you look at the Latin prefix and the Latin root, you get away from the beginning, away from the start. Makes sense. Fairly easy word. It should be paired up with the third one from the bottom, to give up or to leave something unfinished. I like this next word, compunction. I always think of punct as meaning the point. We'll get to the origin in just a second with the point. We use punctuation, which is really just a bunch of points, but compunction means a feeling of uneasiness or anxiety, usually because of doing something wrong, being contrite, being remorseful. You might hear it in the sentence, the German generals seem to have no moral compunction about violating human rights. For some reason, I don't know why, when you hear the word compunction, you always hear the word no compunction. The origin of the word compunction is fairly straightforward. You have com, which we have in a lot of prefixes in English, with, and the original was pungere, to prick or to point out something, and we still use the word punk as a point, and you see that on quite a few words in English, including the word punctuation. So the origin's not particularly odd. Compunction should be paired up with the first definition on the right, uneasiness caused by doing wrong or causing pain, contrition, and all of that stuff. So fairly straightforward. Our fourth word is preponderance. That's the quality of being greater in weight, force, or influence. And the root is fairly simple. Pre, which means beforehand. We have that on a zillion prefixes in English. Even the word prefix has the word pre in it. And pondere, Latin word meant to ponder or to weigh. If you think about it, when we ponder stuff, we weigh it. We weigh the good with the bad. So you can see where the word ponder and weigh come together. And that's what you're doing when you get a preponderance of the evidence. You're weighing the good against the bad, the positive against the negative. You're weighing things. So the quality of being greater is something that you judge once you've weighed the stuff ahead of time. It's used legally, by the way. You might hear the preponderance of the evidence. That's used in civil cases, non-criminal cases, where you're trying to get the majority of the evidence. Of course, in the criminal system, we have to use a different standard beyond a reasonable doubt. So preponderance is a legal term also. The next word, number 5 word, is renovate. Not a hard word. I think a lot of you already know that, but I want you to think about the origin of it. Renovate means to restore, to put in good condition, to make new. You can renovate a house, make it like new again. In this case, re means again, and re often means again, to redo something. And it comes from the root nova, and we get a lot of words with the root nova in it. Innovate, supernova. Something that's novel. You know, you have books that are novels, and that comes from nova too in a different way. But if something's new, you might say it's novel, so it's something new on that. So a fairly easy word to remember. But pay any attention to NOV. It often means something new. Of course, renovate should be paired up to one of the words towards the middle of the definitions on the right. It's to restore, return to the original state. Our sixth word is one of my favorite, clairvoyant. And a clairvoyant is somebody or something that pretends to have a power of seeing objects or actions beyond the range of nature. It's almost a mystical type of ability. Any remarkable prediction could also be clairvoyant, so that takes it a little bit out of the mystical aspect. You could hear somebody say his football predictions were clairvoyant. He just made good predictions. But most of the time it's related to something more on the mystical side. It literally means, and comes from the French, clear-sighted. We actually use the word clairvoyant in English as meaning clear-sighted until the 1800s, and at that point it slowly evolved into the more mystical term that we use today. It comes from the French word clair, which we still have clair. It was clear in French, clair. And voyant, which is derived from the Latin videre, which meant to see clearly, but has the implication that you see clearly into the future in a mystical way now. So that's clairvoyant. That should be paired up to the definition, the second from the bottom, the power of seeing objects beyond the range of natural vision. Our next word is often misunderstood. You see the word max and you think it's the most, and in a vague way it has something to do with the most. Maximum primarily means it's a principle or a rule of conduct. It comes from scientific gobbledygook. It actually was originally a phrase in Latin, in maxima propositio, which meant the greatest premise or the greatest assumption. But, you know, we don't just use it in science today. We use it in all sorts of endeavors. For example, there's moral maxims. The one that I particularly like is it's bad to take pleasure in another's suffering. Sort of goes against the German concept of Schadenfreude, which is a German concept that you take pleasure in others' discomfort or others' bad luck. There's all sorts of maxims. Benjamin Franklin had a whole book on them. You get silly ones. Hemingway's most famous maxim was, always do sober what you said you'd do drunk. I don't particularly know if that makes sense, but it's a famous one. So maximum still means the greatest thing or the greatest ability. So keep that in mind. Don't confuse it with just something big. Certainly, it doesn't always mean something big. It should be paired up with one of the definitions you see in the middle, a common saying of advice or virtue. See, it doesn't always mean the greatest. It can mean a common saying. By the way, in certain parts of the country, they don't say maxim, they say maxime. So keep that in mind in case you're talking. Our next word, the eighth word, is brazen. It means to face boldly or shamelessly. For example, you might say, there was a brazen attempt to rob the bank even though many police were nearby. It's obvious that it's bold, but sometimes it means shameless. You don't really care what other people think. It's one of the few words that we get from Old English. It's not a Latin-related word. It's from Leysin, which is the Old English form of the word brass. And in olden days, brass was considered a very, very hard material. So if you were very hard and very brash, comes from the same word, you were brazen. So the Word brazen should be paired up with excessively bold or brashed. Our next word is renunciation. Some people say renunciation, and that means to relinquish, to abandon, to repudiate or sacrifice something, a title perhaps that you have. It is formed from two Latin sources, the prefix re, which in this case meant against. Usually re means again, but in this case it meant against. And nutare, which meant to speak or announce. We still get that nounce word when we say announce. So it's to speak against something or away from something. So the nunce you get in words such as announce, pronounce, and denounce. So it's still very, very common. So remember, nunce means to speak, in this case, to speak against something. Number 9 should be paired up with one of the definitions in the middle, repudiating or sacrificing something as a right or an ambition. And our last word is invariable. Very easy. Invariable means it's fixed, it's not changing, and it's one of these Latin words that sort of has stuck with most of European languages, including English for a long time. It comes from Latin variare, which meant to change. So if it's in, remember in has two meanings. Sometimes the word in means not, and sometimes it means inside. In this case it means not. Not varied, you are fixed, not changing. And of course that should be paired up with not susceptible to change. So that's that set. Let's begin the next set.